and welcome to the Healthtech Marketing Show. I'm your host, Adam Chirinas, and the Healthtech Marketing Show is brought to you by my firm, Health Launchpad. We are marketing and sales experts in health tech marketing, and our partners in crime who have been a big supporter of a lot of what we do pretty much since the start of the firm 4 years ago. And that's the amazing HIMSS. And I'm looking forward to getting on a plane on Monday to go off to the conference in Orlando. So today's episode is all about AI in healthcare. So we've done quite a few episodes about AI and marketing, but this is actually getting into how AI is getting adopted in healthcare. And I've got two really fantastic guests today who will tell you about sort of firsthand experience of that. So with that, I'm going to bring my two guests to the stage, David Zakariaie and Matthew Coe. David and Matt, just if you both give us a brief intro and then we'll dive into it. David first.
Sounds great. I'm David. I'm the CEO and founder of Senseye. We're a 22-person startup based here in Austin, Texas. Essentially, what we're working on is building the first diagnostic and severity monitoring platform for our mental health. It started as a research project in school, and so this really is my bio, just working on Senseye for the last, or at least the technology behind it for the last 10 years or so.
Matt.
So hi, everybody. My name is Matt. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called DeepScribe. I serve as DeepScribe's president and COO. At DeepScribe, what we do is we essentially use AI to automate the clinical documentation process for physicians. We built what was now known as the very first ambient AI technology in the space. And that refers to something that is able to intelligently listen to a natural patient conversation. And through the natural conversation, we're able to understand, what is clinically relevant in that conversation. We're able to categorize that information into the right sections of the note, and we're able to summarize that information into a sentence that the physician would have otherwise written themselves directly into the EHR. So
it's, what I love about having both of you on is that you're both innovating. You're both got very successful ventures, but you're at different stages. So David, why don't you tell a bit about your personal story and where you are in the journey?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you. So I started Senseye, not so much originally focused on mental health and healthcare, but it started originally as a science fair project, more focused on the technology side of trying to find a way to do incredibly sophisticated eye tracking, but with a normal video camera instead of a $30,000, $40,000 eye tracker. The concept of eye tracking is not novel. It's kind of been established for a very long time. But traditionally, like the big technical problem that no one's been able to solve is that on a normal camera, it's very difficult to kind of identify in people with darker eyes the boundary between the iris and the pupil. And so doing any kind of pupillometry has traditionally been a very kind of difficult task that's required a lot of proprietary hardware. And so the initial kind of reason I started Senseye was not so much with a product in mind, which is what everyone tells you not to do, but with kind of a core technology in mind of let's figure out if we can find a way to do eye tracking essentially with the front-facing camera of a cell phone. And if we get it to the point where it works, we'll kind of figure out what the use case is for it later. And so Senseye started off with just a couple of us in a lab trying to figure out how to do exactly that. And once we got it to the point in kind of late 2019, early 2020, where the technology worked, we had kind of some of the core science behind it validated, we got to the point of wanting to actually figure out what the best application and use case was for it. And that's kind of how we settled on mental health. And there were a couple of reasons why we kind of settled on mental health as the perfect application. The first is, it's a space that we've all become incredibly familiar with. But I, like a lot of us, have had my own kind of personal mental health challenges for a very long time. My mom was also a psychologist, and so I kind of grew up with mental health. It's not as fun as it sounds, but I kind of was, always aware of the kind of practitioner provider side of it. But, it's a completely untapped space. There's no measurement in mental health whatsoever. And so it was kind of the perfect balance between a very large commercial opportunity. And we kind of came to the realization of like, if this works, and at that time we had no idea if it was going to work or not, but like, if this works, if we can actually build diagnostics for mental health, we can kind of objectively understand what mental health looks like from a pathology standpoint, but also be able to show and understand if treatments are working. There are very few lives that it wouldn't touch. And so it kind of seemed like the right, really big problem for us to try and tackle. And that's kind of how we took the technology down this direction.
That's really, what a great story. How about you, Matt? What's your personal journey here?
Yeah, I think similar to David, DeepScribe really started as us trying to solve a personal problem. I think for me, I was serving as care coordinator for my mother when she had breast cancer. And my mom's from Taiwan and she doesn't speak English very well. And I was mainly interpreting kind of what her physician was saying for her and just being with her and advocating for her during her appointments. And we have this joke at the company that DeepScribe started when my mom asked me if I was lying to her about what I was translating. And at first I thought, I was just shocked. I was like, why would I ever do that? I thought he was making fun of me because my Mandarin is terrible. But, she would say, if everything is going well, why am I being treated like I'm already dead? And, that obviously had a really tremendous impact on me. And I felt like I needed to do more and become a better advocate. And when I started looking for other people to take better care of my mom, the only oncologist I knew was actually my co-founder's father, who was a practicing oncologist at the time. And when we started talking to his dad, that's when we really started to appreciate the problem that we're solving today. We learned that, the joy of care was being ripped from physicians, leading to dangerous levels of physician burnout. And, having physicians spend nearly half of their day writing notes when what they want to really do is take care of patients. It wasn't that, I learned that it wasn't that the physicians and the clinicians didn't want to provide the high quality, compassionate care that I was looking for. It was simply that they were just drowning in the sea of administrative burden. And conveniently at the time, my co-founder Akash was leading the natural language processing group at the Berkeley AI Research Lab. And he was really summarization. And, we both just found it fascinating how all this innovation was happening all around us, but we didn't really see the innovation happening. So we thought, wouldn't it be a really cool idea to apply some of the technology that he was building in the lab and those concepts there to the problem of documentation? So this is 2017 when we came up with this crazy idea to build what is now known as an ambient AI technology. But we had this idea that would be able to, understand a natural patient conversation and be able to write a note. So, we went to market. Well, we did a bunch of R&D for about 2.5 years, really kind of figuring out how do we actually label this data in a way that is able to improve the performance rather than having to amass a significant volume of the data. So we got really good at being able to label this data at a very high dimension to be able to allow us to represent the data in any different way. And over the years, we finally kind of came to market. We have thousands of physicians that use DeepScribe every single day for their documentation. And what was really unique for us is the company has evolved a lot, right? So when we started the business, it wasn't a fully AI solution. We had expert human reviewers that were labeling this data for us. And the key innovation that we were able to do was have the expert human reviewers produce a note while labeling the data. And we finally got to the point where our fully automated solution or our model surpassed the accuracy of our human model. And today we have, the world's most accurate purpose-built LLM in clinical documentation.
Yeah.
That was only able to be achieved by, what we now have is the largest, fastest growing data set of patient conversations that are all meticulously labeled in the world. So it's been a long journey, but it's exciting to see the impact that we're able to make. And like David, it's really awesome to be able to see as a non-clinician the impact that technology can have on real lives.
Well, what I think's what's really struck me about listening to you both is that you both started with trying to solve a patient problem in a way that had affected you personally, but you then turn that into solving a business and an operational problem for healthcare, because unfortunately at the end of the day, just doing well for patients isn't necessarily going to get you that far. And so I think it's very interesting hearing the sort of that same journey of starting for advocating for solving a patient problem using the technology to then address a clear operational or business issue within healthcare. Let's stay with you, Matt. You're quite far along here. You've been at this for 7 years. The company, when did you bring the product to market?
We brought the product to market in March of 2020 during the wave of COVID.
No, funny enough, so your happy 4th anniversary. In my actually celebrating my 4th anniversary, we launched Health Launchpad 4 years ago. I think we've done really well, but I think we've come quite as far as you have. But so it's remarkable what you've done in those 4 years. But tell us about who the customers are and who the users are, because they're not always the same, right? And then David, we'll come back to you on that after that.
Yeah, I'll answer that question by first kind of sharing where we started, because I think that's really relevant to what we're building today and how we're able to kind of win the market that we're in. So when we started the product, we didn't have any like health system connections. We didn't go live at like UCSF or a big health system on our first day of launching. We went to like our aunties and uncles who are doctors that asked for feedback. When we started the company, we were really selling to that segment of the market. So these private practice ambulatory clinicians, we would qualify them based off of the EHR integration or qualify them based off of the specialty that they're in, but mostly selling into kind of a segment where the user is the buyer. And we ran the company for, 2.5, 3 years, really only targeting that market. And we did a really, really good job at doing that. But the reason why that's relevant to what we're doing today is because the product that was built, when you're dealing with thousands of different customers with thousands of different requirements, we were able to kind of build almost like thousands of custom products that ultimately became a really robust enterprise product that allows us to handle all the edge cases that you meet when you're deploying to a larger health system. Today, DeepScribe mostly is servicing, the large health systems or, large organizations and enterprises that have multiple specialties underneath their roof. So I think without the journey, we wouldn't have been able to really service the target segment that we're targeting today.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because, a lot of startups that are selling a solution to enterprise healthcare, so big healthcare systems, quite a few of them start maybe being incubated within a big healthcare system and might go 5 or 6 years without collecting it, without sending a single invoice. Whereas you guys actually have been generating cash since, I'm sure since early 2020 and have been able to prove the business in market by commercializing it early. And I think, you're pivoting over it. Well, it's not pivoting because you're still serving both markets, but you've definitely expanded into the big healthcare systems. And you integrate with Epic and all the ones that you check those boxes, which is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
David, how about you? Now, David, you're at a different stage, and I know that you've got a different journey you're on because the FDA is involved with what you do, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so I think that there's a couple different parts to our go-to-market strategy. A lot of it has to do with kind of, FDA, like you said. So we are the product that we're working on building, and we're currently in essentially our phase 2 trials for is a diagnostic for PTSD. And then we're also in trials, but at a much, much earlier stage for anxiety and depression. And so because they want to be an actual diagnostic, the core product that we're building, we're not really allowed to sell it until we actually have FDA approval, which makes sense. But there are kind of some applications and use cases that we're able to go after for FDA approval. And so what we started to do right now, like what we're kind of calling it is essentially a series of clinical use pilots where we're kind of partnering with with a subset of the attended customers for the other side of FDA approval, whether it's a telehealth platform, or a larger healthcare system. And essentially we're doing like a paid pilot ahead of FDA approval, but it's set up essentially as like a type of a clinical trial or a research study. And so we're informed consenting all of the patients who the health system is having participate into it. And so they are opting in, and the health system isn't solely relying on our diagnostic. They're kind of are doing things the way that they are currently doing it. And then they're also using our tool. And so it essentially serves as a way for us to kind of start to show how the technology works, show the efficacy, and kind of work through a lot of the integration challenges ahead of FDA approval. But because it's being done as kind of part of a clinical trial, it's a way for us to start those deployments ahead of approval. And then the second kind of piece to our go-to-market strategy before FDA, we've started to partner with a couple of pharma companies that are essentially in their own clinical trial process right now for some sort of a psychiatric drug. And the problem that they face a lot of the time is a very high placebo response on psychiatric drug trials because of the amount of time that the participants on the trial are receiving from a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And so naturally they just feel better. And so when when the only endpoint they have on a lot of these trials to show their drugs are actually working is a 10 or 15 question questionnaire, it's not kind of the most accurate way of showing their drugs are actually working. And so there's a couple of pharma relationships where we basically serve as a secondary or exploratory endpoint on their trials. And we become, a more objective way for them to actually show the FDA that their drugs are actually working. And so that's kind of how we're able to both generate revenue, but also get a pretty substantial amount of real world data pre-FDA. And then on the other side of FDA approval, kind of the way we're thinking about our go-to-market strategy right now, and it's not perfected yet, and it really won't be until we're actually approved and trying it. But there's a lot of new in what we're doing. It's the first mental health diagnostic. It's the first kind of diagnostic that's 100% software and doesn't require any commodity hardware. It's the first diagnostic where it's being delivered primarily through telehealth, because that's where a lot of mental health patients are right now. And so it's kind of new on new on new. And so the way that we're kind of thinking about our go-to-market strategy, about 75 to 80%, depending on the study you look at, of mental health patients are being diagnosed and treated exclusively in primary care. So a large majority of it isn't even touching a psychologist or a psychiatrist.
Yes.
And you're very lucky if a couple of these physicians are in a single office, but for the most part, it's kind of solo practitioners. And so the more traditional kind of sales process in medical device of knocking on everyone's door and trying to sell is not really going to work here. And so our thought process was, let's turn the aggregators of mental health patients into our customers instead. And right now, that's a lot of the large telehealth providers, because about 80% of all mental health patients are being primarily seen on telehealth. And on the other side of COVID, it's kind of the only area of telehealth where the use is still getting larger and larger. Those patients are not going back, to a doctor's office. And so we've essentially built the technology, not as a standalone app, but as a software development kit. However, it's like a specialty telehealth provider like a Talkspace or a BetterHelp, or as we get more mature, the kind of the large payer-owned providers, such as kind of, Optum and Evernorth, our thought process is, it's a software development kit. It gets kind of built in as kind of a app within an app inside of the existing telehealth framework they're using. It becomes a standard way that they diagnose and track severity of their patients. And that way, we don't really have to change the clinical workflow at all on kind of how that practice works. It just it fits in wherever they want it. And it's just now the case. They have an objective diagnostic instead of a questionnaire.
So your go-to-market focus is not going to be selling to the end customers. So a psychiatric institute or a healthcare system, it's basically working with partners, the telehealth vendors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there's definitely a lot of the large healthcare systems will end up being customers because they're kind of owning and running their own telehealth environments. But the way we think about it is we're basically a plug-in wherever there's a digital interaction between a mental health practitioner or a primary care physician and a patient.
Very interesting. So, Matt, your go-to-market approach is very different. And maybe talk about, I don't want to put you in a position of revealing competitive secrets, but sort of sense of kind of like the go-to-market organization that you're in the process of building. Because, we're somewhat involved with it right now. It's just fascinating watching how you're doing that.
Yeah, I think we have a really unique go-to-market motion in our space. I think typically when you think about B2B healthcare, B2B SaaS, you think about a big inside sales team dialing for dollars, or it's heavily focused on BD. Going back to the genesis of DeepScribe, we didn't have a lot of that DNA. We kind of thought about, if we were a doctor, how would we buy the solution? And when we went online, we found that no one was really doing any digital marketing. Well, no one was really focusing on SEO and SEM. And this is, again, back in like 2018, 2019, when the word ambient didn't really exist. And, we decided to make a really concerted effort into establishing domain authority around all the keywords relevant to clinical documentation, burnout, ambient AI, scribes, virtual scribes, et cetera. And we were able to get a bunch of amazing traction right during the wake of COVID, because that's when a lot of the clinicians were sent home and they were just finally had the room to breathe, to look for innovation, hey, like what problems am I going through? Let's just Google these problems. And when you Google these problems, we had the timing right. DeepScribe would come up as like the first thing that showed up. So that was kind of where the company started, and our original go-to-market motion. It was our entire growth for the first, I would say, 2.5 years of the business has entirely been led by inbound, mostly through the SEO, SEM, which I think is really unique if you talk to anybody else.
Yeah, oh, completely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But as the company matures and targeting these health systems and targeting, what we believe is our unique advantage in the space, which is our ability to customize our notes at scale. We have identified, segments of the market that we believe that we can uniquely cater to and that uniquely value the things that we can only do. And that's where we started kind of exploring the idea of ABM. I actually met Adam, or actually read a lot of Adam's blogs before I actually met him, and we kind of laughed about that. But yeah, I think right now our business is really focused on kind of evolving that inbound motion, which today is still really successful, even in the enterprise segment. I think like before we started, around 5 to 10% of our inbounds were from enterprise. Today, around 25% of all the inbounds that we get are from enterprise. And we still get a lot of good leads from that channel. However, with inbound, you can't really control your destiny, right? There are certain people that are more successful on our product than others. And with using a more kind of direct marketing campaign, we're able to kind of target the customers that we specifically want. So that's where ABM comes in. That's where, having a really strong content calendar, content strategy comes in. But yeah, and the team around it is evolving as well. I think before, the team that we have was really it was really a capacity problem, right? Because we had so many leads. It was, how much calendar space can we open up? How do we optimize the conversion from demo, set to demo held? And now it's a lot more, hey, like how do we be a lot more thoughtful about the demos that we're trying to hold? How do we be a lot more thoughtful about the materials that we're showing them, about how, the product that we're building is almost like customized for their unique needs? So it's a really interesting time in the business, and it's something that I'm really excited about because we're getting a lot of amazing traction in this evolution and moving up market. And I think it's early days, and the leading indicators of what we're building is all kind of up to the right. So
it's so great seeing you be successful with that inbound marketing, and particularly moving it upstream. I think that a lot of health tech marketing folks in my community, who are selling to enterprise, really struggle with it. And part of the challenge is that if you haven't started with it, you say, well, we'll do an SEO strategy. Okay, great. So we'll do the SEO strategy. Here are the keywords that you want to try and dominate. And, let's develop a content strategy around that. And the cadence has got to be, you've got to post something every week, and you've got to do this, your pages. And it's just too hard.
Yeah.
And, to sustain the level of effort to actually build a really successful inbound strategy means you've just got to be completely committed to it. I find that with the clients that I work with, companies like yourself who come from kind of like the venture-backed world of, you're based in Silicon Valley, or you're based in San Francisco, that have a sort of, that come from a venture-backed world where the investors are used to a SaaS playbook, I find tend to be more successful at that because there's a sort of a mentality of like investing the time to make it work and seeing it happen, as opposed to the more traditional model, which is sales-led, relationship-oriented. And I believe that you'll be the most successful with it because it's the way that buyers buy. They don't want to meet with people until they've done their homework. And I think you're setting up the infrastructure to do that. Yeah. So, I just want to sort of to wrap things up, and I want to ask you a question, which is, and give yourself a moment to think about this, is if you could go back and give yourself a piece of advice 3 years ago, go back, get in the time machine and go back 3-4 years ago, what's the single piece of advice that you give yourself? And I'll let whoever wants to go first go first.
It's a very loaded question. Because I think that
yes,
I think the gut, I think my gut reaction would be like, don't do it. That's what I would tell myself. But I don't think that's actually the truth. But I think it's kind of, I think it's representative of a couple of things. I think like as entrepreneurs, like if you're going to start a startup, and I think this is true regardless of industry, but like as we all know, trying to do something in healthcare is one of the most difficult areas to kind of start a company in, and there's many reasons for that, but it's like it's a million times harder than you can ever imagine it's going to be. But there's nothing that can prepare you for that or allow you to understand that until you just do it. Everyone talks about how a startup is hard, but I think until you actually do it, you'll just never understand like the toll it takes and the level of kind of like commitment and like sanity that it takes away from you. And so I think, there's like two aspects that have to be true. You have to really believe that you have a good idea, and you have to actually believe in the idea. And then you have to believe that the world can't exist without what you're doing for whatever reason. And if you believe that, then that will be like, that will give you the drive of like doing all the crazy, ridiculous things you have to do to kind of get the startup to a point of working. And so I think that would be my advice to myself, but I think also to like anyone else is like, if you believe in what you're doing enough that you don't think the world can exist without it, that's kind of what will give you the motivation to kind of like take it all the way. But yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, I deeply resonate with what David said. I feel like as a founder, our job is to solve an unsolvable problem. And when you're solving an unsolvable problem, it feels like you're eating glass. And if you don't have a strong conviction about the reality that everyone should be living in because you see reality differently, you won't be able to kind of survive. But I think if you were to answer your question of what I would do different, there's a lot of things I would do different. But I think the one that kind of stands out to me is I think I would be a lot more open with what we're building, how we're building things. Because when we started our business, we were very kind of close to the best in terms of everything that we were doing, all the customers that we had, all the traction that we're getting, our go-to-market strategy, right? What keywords we're using, the technology, how we're labeling, like all these things we thought were just like super proprietary. And I think a lot of them are, but if I were to do everything again, I do think that, if your idea is so easily replicable that if you just told somebody something and they're able to replicate it, like you don't really have a business at all, right? Like to David's point, right? Great companies are built not just with a good idea. That's like 10% of the battle. 90% of the battle is like you need to execute, right? And that's what 90% of people aren't willing to do. So building out in the wild and showing people like, all your journey along the way, I think is something that I would have done differently, because I think the amount of the trust that you build with not just your customer base, but also just like the other partners that you meet along the way that you may not know are going to be vital to your success will ultimately like appreciate and understand, what you believe more versus, just trying to play coy with everything. So yeah, if I were to do anything differently, it would be to, build in the wild and be a little bit more open with what you're building and helping the world innovate rather than just thinking that, your idea is wrong.
I so appreciate the clarity and candor of that advice. And having been through the journey myself, it so resonates with me. I want to thank you both, David and Matt, so much for taking the time. I know, God knows, I know how busy you both are. So taking an hour out of your day to talk to me is greatly appreciated. I'm just going to wrap things up. And so again, thank you to you both for being so open and sharing your perspectives today.
Thank you.
So let's wrap things up. I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I loved listening to them both. So if you're watching the video, you can subscribe to this on Apple and on Spotify, Frank, whatever your favorite podcast app is. We're on all of them. And if you're listening to this and you want to see them both, it's definitely worth it. Better looking than I am. We have a YouTube video. So thank you to you for listening. Thank you to HIMSS for your sponsorship of this, and hope to see everybody on future episodes.